So we've got an absolutely stellar panel. Andrew's going to take a seat. I understand, Assistant Minister, you're joining us on stage, so I'd invite you back up onto the stage and to be a part of the conversation. I'm delighted to have the CEOs of our three conveners joining me on the panel this afternoon. Ken Morrison, CEO of the Property Council, Edwina MacDonald, Acting CEO of ACOSS, and I'm looking for Ines, there at the back of the room, making a grand entrance from the rear. Ines Willox, of course, CEO of the Australian Industry Group. Please give them a round of applause. So, Ken, I might start with you. And we've had, I think, from both from Peter and also from Andrew, sort of that sense of the global context and the way that energy efficiency has been seen as kind of a core to our emissions reduction journey overseas. It kind of hasn't been grounded in that same way here in Australia. And I know that's something you're very passionate about. Energy efficiency, we've got this newly minted 43% target, recently legislated in an initial flag in the sand from the Albanese government about where we're heading. I was just wondering if you could unpack for us, what the role of energy efficiency is in that near-term goal in 2030, and also what its role is going to be as we move forward to that final target of net zero by 2050.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Delighted to. But first, can I just congratulate Assistant Minister McAllister and the government for the commitment today. I think that's tremendous that we've got a government that wants to focus on the demand side, on energy efficiency, and that someone's been allocated to drive that work. So thank you very much for that, and looking forward to collaborating with you on that. It's a no-brainer that we have this focus on the demand side, and I think the previous speakers have spoken about it very well, in that, of course, if we're going to get to our net zero targets, we need to be able to decarbonise energy supply, but we also need to look for the least cost abatement options, and many of those on the demand side.
Yep.
We also need to look at the benefits, the benefits to the economy as well. And one of the things we know is that this energy transition that's in front of Australia and the world is going to cost a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of investment that's going to go into energy distribution systems, renewable energy forms. A lot of that money will come from private sources. A lot of that will also come from governments, both on budget and off budget. And if energy efficiency can make a difference in terms of avoiding some of that investment, then that's a really important part of the economic transition as well. That's something that Jim Chalmers should be very interested in terms of how do you avoid some of these big bills that are coming government's way. So I think whether you're looking at from that net zero perspective, or you're looking at the dollar investment perspective, it makes a lot of sense for it to be a big part of the future, and that's why it's really good we've got that commitment today.
Yeah, and Edwina, there's that cost lens, which Ken's spoken so eloquently to, but then there's kind of lived experience of our most vulnerable, and what we often talk about is there's a social licence to this transition, and we've got to bring the whole community along with us, and we've got to bring the most vulnerable along with us too. Can you maybe unpack what energy efficiency means at the ground level, renters and vulnerable households around Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. I will just start by acknowledging we're on Gadigal country, and I think that in terms of climate change, we know that First Nations are impacted greatly by climate change and need to be very much part of the solution and central to the solution. And I thank you, Assistant Minister, particularly for your commitment to collaboration and engagement. It's certainly appreciated, I think, by all of us here and very much by the sector. And also particularly for the words that you spoke about, that in terms of people who are on the lowest incomes or the most vulnerable, that they do experience energy stress disproportionately to others. And it's really great to have that acknowledgement from the Assistant Minister for Energy Efficiency, or focusing on energy efficiency. It's certainly consistent with what we're hearing. We've just conducted a survey of people on income support to hear how they're coping or not coping, as the case is at the moment, with increasing costs of living. And it came out really strongly in that survey, just the impact that energy stress is having on people. So people have told us that currently about half of the people that we've surveyed are either currently in energy debt or expect to be in energy debt when their next energy bill comes in. And at the moment, we're just coming out of a cold winter, so we're expecting those bills aren't going to be good, but also it's in the context of people having already done all they can to reduce their energy use. So people are telling us they're doing things like cutting down on showers, the number of showers that they're having, they're cutting down on lighting, on heating, they're going to bed early to stay warm, they've changed the way they're cooking in order to reduce energy. So they're already trying to do all they can to reduce energy, but at the same time they're in this extreme energy debt. And we know that it is impacting people's health and well-being. Practically everyone we surveyed told us that they're not having enough money to pay for basics like energy is impacting their health. People are telling us, and as you mentioned, that people are giving up essentials. They can't afford all the essentials, so they're having to make choices. And an energy bill coming in is something that people often need to prioritise paying. So people are skipping meals, they're skipping medicine, either not taking the medicine or kind of stringing out the dosage to make it last longer. We had one woman, for example, tell us that the fortnight that her energy bill comes in, she only buys bread and milk for that fortnight because that's all she can afford to buy in order to pay the bill. So we certainly know that this is really hitting hard in terms of what people can afford and then the flow-on impact it has to their health. And the other side of it that we know, which the Minister also spoke to, is that people on low incomes are generally living in poorer quality housing and they've got less control over that housing. So they're not able to implement the energy efficiency approaches that people on higher incomes can do, buying smarter appliances, changing the house that you're living in order to make it more energy efficient, or even just living in a more modern, more energy efficient house. And that this is having a flow-on effect also to people's health. So people are living in houses that are too damp, that are too cold, that are in winter too hot in summer. They're experiencing health effects from that as well: respiratory illness, cardiovascular illness, mental health effects. And we know that living in too hot and too cold houses is actually killing people as well. So we know that both the impact of not having enough money to pay for the energy bills hitting home, and also the impact of living in houses and homes that people can't afford to make more energy efficient is also having this great impact on health. And we also know that people are bearing this cost disproportionately. So people on lower incomes pay a higher percentage of their income, 4 times actually of their income compared to people on higher incomes. So it's certainly impacting in all these different ways. And that's why we see it as so important in terms of having this energy efficiency strategy and the plan going forward, and having the particular focus for people on low incomes, looking at prioritising that, and I think there's agreement generally around that, to prioritise that in order to address the hardship, address the energy debt for people on low incomes, while at the same time addressing reducing emissions as well.
And going to the point we were discussing earlier around, commercial buildings, we have frameworks in place, we have neighbours which we can back in and accelerate. In the residential space, we don't have those same systems and processes in place. So we need to create an ecosystem, right, that can support, upgrading all those millions of homes. And one of the ways we can do that is support vulnerable households and upgrades in that space, which helps create the ecosystem which the rest of the market can leverage. It's been a tough year for vulnerable households. It's also been a tough year for business, right? Energy costs have been a very significant concern for business, particularly on gas, but across gas and electricity. Obviously, those costs on the gas side are flowing through into electricity markets, and I suppose it's really raised the consciousness around where we are in this transition and how we navigate our way through maintaining current industries. Obviously, we want to grow new industries as well. Specifically on electricity, Ines, where does the demand side sit from your perspective, and what role can it play to ensuring we get to a place for business but sees them having access to a secure, reliable and affordable supply of energy?
Thanks, Luke, and thank you to everyone who's here. Special thanks to the McAllisters for their presentation. I must say, Andrew, not much known about me, but I spent 3 years in California as our Consul General in California in the mid-2000s, and the reason I wanted to go there wasn't for the movie launches, although they were fun, and all the TV shows and everything else, was in part because it was our second biggest expat market, but in large part it was because of the work that California was doing in policy at that time, particularly around climate policy with the Schwarzenegger administration. And I sort of take my mind back to their decisions around vehicle emission reductions and the role of the Clean Air Board. It was Mary Nichols at the time, and the Energy Commission. And it was really world leading, and that was what excited me about going there in a policy sense. And my third day in Los Angeles was up at Pepperdine University for the Schwarzenegger-Blair Climate Pact announcement. Now, stunning place, Pepperdine University, but the point was that California has always been a leader in this space, and it's great to see that still is, obviously, and is sort of giving a lot of thought to how we evolve as a society and as a global community. So I just congratulate you for that, and hopefully you can learn some things here. I think what happened in California at the time really did start to drive the climate debate here, for better or worse, starting from about the 2007 election and its prelude to that, because the world was moving, and we are still moving, and where we get to, I think we all know where we want to get to, and that's thanking you, Jenny, for the 43% emissions reduction target. So it does give us a goal. It is still tough for business. Emma was laying out households, the story for households. It's perhaps not that graphic in some terms that you can allude to, but you've got if you were to do a SWOT analysis, you have reliability at one side, you have demand at the other, you have price up the top there that you have to work through, and then you have efficiency as well to take into account. You look at the latest AEMO report on electricity, and it tells us that we're failing just about on every reliability count. But hang on, we're building all these great new facilities and hydro dams and the like. So we'll get there, but hang on, wait again a minute. Oh, that's going to take a long time. Regulatory approvals, we might not get there. We know that work is going on, and it's important that it does go on, but it's going to be bumpy and lumpy. But in the meantime, sort of the ugly cousin in all of this debate is efficiency.
Steady on, Innes.
It's the forgotten child, I'll put it that way.
Slightly better.
It gets ignored at our peril because perhaps it isn't sexy, for businesses. But it is where businesses are now seeing that they can make enormous savings and enormous gains in the space of efficiency, doing things better with what you've got, or even reducing what you need. There's two sides to the equation. A lot of the focus in the broader public debate and thinking has been around the supply side.
Yep.
More and more, we would say, has to now go, as we work through what's happening on the supply side, has to go through, and a lot of discussion, conversation has to occur around what happens on the efficiency side, the demand side, so that we can manage both sides of the equation. It's been very much a one-sided public debate, and in terms of business, broader economic thinking as well, it's been fairly one-sided. So the benefits of efficiency, demand side, haven't really been exploited yet. And I think that's exciting, because that's where there is now the potential to make a lot of gain through strong policy leadership and support, because it's not always going to be easy for business to make these changes that they need to make. But I think this is where maybe over the next decade or less, as we're working our way through supply side, that the demand side is where we can really make some real key structural gains across the community to benefit both industry and households.
And it's been a little bit of the theme as we've been working through. You've got the efficiency opportunity, so managing that load, and then in some industries, not all, but in some, particularly where you're dealing with low temperature process heat, you've also got that electrification opportunity that we've been talking about on the way through, which allows you to pair, whether it's in food processes or other parts of industry, that load with renewable electricity supply. Andrew, I might go to you because you sort of mentioned the governance piece on the way through, and the California Energy Commission is almost unique around the world in kind of pairing demand side and supply side, and then that regulatory role with buildings and with appliances. But I'm just fascinated by this forecast piece. That key role you have sitting between the agencies of really properly characterising the trade-offs. Right, we can build generation or networks to X capacity, or we can sort of invest in demand side policies and thinking about how you get to that ultimate optimum outcome. How important has that been in terms of the efficiency achievement that you've been able to drive there in California to date, but also just having that capacity moving forward to make those trade-offs as we sort of rebuild our energy system in real time, right?
Yeah. Well, really have appreciated everyone's comments, and I think we're all pretty much singing from the same hymn, different pages from the same hymnal, which is really great. It does take a fair amount of resources, and that is relatively uncommon in a state energy office in the U.S. We're by far the largest state energy office, but the benefit is that when we're regulating, when we're doing the building code, which affects every building project, every new construction, and many building upgrades across the state, what we can justify as feasible and cost effective is based on the most the best sort of sum total benefit of all the hours of the year, right? We do this 8760 calculation based on valuing peak hours at their sort of long run, average pushing to marginal cost over the next 20, 30 years. And so we're sort of future-proofing the buildings by justifying more investment now or different investment, not necessarily more, in every building project that happens today, so that building is actually going to perform well off into the future as we reach towards our goals. And so there is a crack analytical team behind the forecast. I wanted to also just highlight, though, that one thing that I'm particularly sort of proud of and I lean on, and I think it's maybe not totally unique to California, but I think it's worth pointing out, our process is kind of our currency. Our brand is what it is. People trust what we put out there into the world because we have this consultative process, and you're starting down this path here as well, which is just fantastic. You've got to listen. Everybody doesn't agree right at the outset. I mean, hopefully nobody's carrying tomatoes here, and I put proposals out there. My colleagues put proposals out there that are not popular. They are maybe a little bit misguided, and so the process allows us to have workshops and take public comment, put it all on the record, build a record, and then make decisions based on that record. And I think, and that creates an accountability that creates a brand of trust. And in my mind, that's what democracy is all about.
Yeah.
I mean, that process is, okay, we have a social goal we're moving towards. We have to do it in a way that's transparent and accountable. Without defanging it, but we really got to be aggressive and muscular. We have deep authority. We're going to use that authority, but we really, I think, lean on the process. I think that's the lifeblood of sort of the whole ecosystem is a process that we can manage and be accountable. And so if anybody is really unhappy and they're like sort of their inclination is to sue us or something like that, well, they look at the record and they're like, we're going to lose, so they don't. And so that's just the real politic. It's an effective strategy.
No tomatoes so far, but we haven't got the gas yet, so we'll see how we go. Minister, you're embarking on this journey. We've just heard Andrew talk about how important it is to consult. You've been re-immersing yourself in this space for the last 3 or 4 months. What are the big questions that sort of are unresolved for you as you embark in this process? What are you looking for from all of us, the stakeholders in this room, which, you know, some came across town on a very wet day, some came from all over Australia to be with us here today. What are the things that you're looking for? What are the big unresolved questions that you're really hoping to get some guidance on from this room and everybody listening in at home?
Thank you, Luke. Look, I do come back to this after something of an absence, and looking around the room, there's a lot of people who have for a very long time been involved in climate and energy policy. So when I was last sort of taking on a job of this kind, you know, Al Gore had just released his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. There was enormous community interest in what we were going to do about climate. But in truth, the technology solutions were not well developed. They were promising, but they were not well developed and well established. And the business community was maybe not ready to engage, was anxious. The difference this time is that coming in within sort of a day or two of being sworn into the portfolio, Minister Bowen said, "Oh, there's a meeting on this morning, I think you should come to it." And sort of in wandered many of the characters on the platform. And what became apparent to me was that I was operating in a different environment because, in fact, leading business organisations were collaborating with leading advocacy organisations to argue for a kind of change, and that actually business was ready to lead, and that government's job, in a way, was to enable, facilitate and catch up. It's a long way in, but I think the thing that would be useful for me over the course of this afternoon and in all of the subsequent engagements we have is to really bring focus to what it is that government might do to unlock some of the impediments that are in the way of businesses who are ready to do things. And of course, the things that, you know, are always going to require financial support, such as some of the challenges that you referred to, Edwina. But I think really thinking through where are the areas where business is ready to go, ready to act, but there's a regulatory impediment, there's an informational impediment, there's some kind of coordination problem that stops business investment or business action. These are some of the early things that we can get done and demonstrate proof of concept in terms of energy efficiency, and I'd be really interested to hear people's thinking about those things.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned in your address was the National Energy Productivity Ban, which I think we can now describe as dead, buried and cremated. We're in a new era now. Rob Murray-Leach will probably be pretty pleased about that outcome. But it did set a target. You made the point that it wasn't high enough. I guess that's going to be a process that we work through in terms of what our aspirations should be. But I was interested maybe throwing to you, Edwina, on the topic of a target, because Andrew's raised it. You know, there's an ambitious target in California, which is driving a lot of hard thinking, right, about how, the various opportunities around the state and what is already a very efficient economy. So what role do you think a target could play, and how should we be thinking about that in the context of your constituency of vulnerable households?
I mean, I think you've touched on it, and Andrew did as well, about both the transparency, but also I think the transparency around having a shared goal, and then there's a shared goal that we can all then collaborate and engage and work towards. And I guess the hope would be that having a target like that would be, a catalyst or a momentum for change to move forward amidst all this collaboration, all the ideas. So we'd be using the target to do things like, we'd have clear actions, and then we'd have clear deadlines, nothing like a deadline, clear deadlines for delivering on those actions. We'd be able to drive strategic policy decisions, and we'd be able to encourage investment as part of the target and the strategy that goes alongside it. I think importantly, it would need to have funded policies and programs running alongside it to support, how we're going to reach the target. And from our perspective, we'd want to see some specific targets around what's happening for people in low-income houses.
Yep.
I think in terms of those funded policy ideas, I think for us the kind of priority continues to be making sure that we do put people in low-income housing first as part of that, and to have a really concerted strategy around that. And for us, that's starting with looking at energy efficiency upgrades in low-income housing. So we're talking about social housing, private renters, also low-income homeowners, and seeing as that as a way to both meet reducing energy hardship and energy debt, which is addressing poverty and inequality, while also reducing emissions and building that supply chain and workforce that can then go into rolling that out more broadly to other households. So that would be a key priority at the federal level, but it would also support those conversations at the state and territory level as well. And so we'd be looking for action at the state and territory level as well to meet the targets. So things like having all states and territories implementing the increase of the minimum efficiency standards in new builds that we've seen the joint minister's decision on recently. We'd be looking at social housing being built to higher standards and looking at minimum energy efficiency standards across rental properties as well.
I think you make an incredible point, which is like you've got a high-level cross-cutting target, but then actually breaking it down into what it means in particular sectors is incredibly important. I don't know, Ken, if you want to comment on that, or perhaps pick up the theme around governance and energy market governance, which Andrew sort of intimated has been kind of a key enabler of an awful lot of ambitious policy over almost 50 years in California.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is that there is an urgency around the policy making here, because when we look at the official forecast, we've got a sort of black box of energy efficiency delivering emissions reductions, but without really the policy drivers to achieve that. So there is an urgency here if we're going to achieve those 43% targets. The other thing is, yes, absolutely. We've got those high-level targets which the government has now provided us with. So as we're embarking on this strategy on the demand side, it'd be great that if there was a target which translated through and provide the same discipline and focus to those things. I think it is important. When one of the things when we're talking about real estate and property, we're talking about a really big opportunity. We're talking about a sector which is responsible for about a quarter of Australia's emissions and about half of Australia's energy use. So the opportunity is significant, but the complexity is also quite significant because there are a lot of different actors. It's not just the very sophisticated organisations like Mirvac who's hosting us here today. It's literally everybody who lives or owns a dwelling. It's every builder, every supplier in the food chain, an enormous amount of actors you've got to try to move along the journey here. So you need incentives for the best players to continue to do great work. You need the sticks, you need the regulation to be able to move up along the way, and you need the enablers. And one of the things when you're looking at the residential sector is having that enabler. So we've got Neighbours that does a great work. We've got Green Star does amazing work. Where's the residential equivalent of Neighbours? There is good work which the new government inherits, but it's a little bit. It feels like sort of a 1990s level of work. It's like the 90s. The music was great. My niece could play 5 games of squash a week. It was fantastic. But I don't know why we would design an energy or a framework for assessing energy efficiency for people who have little time, little money to invest in that process. Let's use technology, as Andrew was saying, to really enable best of class outcomes here. I think there's something really revolutionary that could be done with federal government leadership in partnership with the states and territories to enable great outcomes, good policy levers, but also a whole bunch of other incentives and banks coming in and providing what they do in New Zealand, discount market loans for energy efficient homes. Why wouldn't we use those levers? So there's some really big opportunities. Not all of them are in the carrots and sticks. The enablers are also important.
So there you go, Minister. Put away the Pearl Jam and break out the Taylor Swift when it comes to residential ratings.
Can I just add one point to this? Because I think it's a really key point. So you got to take advantage of opportunities when they come, right? And that's the nature of politics. But we just happen to have in California a confluence of events this year where we had a big budget surplus. Yeah. We had. We're really getting where the low-hanging fruit is not really abundant anymore. And so some hard choices about where to put our dollars, you know. And so we ended up and it takes leadership in the legislature. Often there are individuals that are just really keen on these issues, and they provide leadership and get legislation through at state, you know, and federal level. And so in our case, we just had a raft of legislation that altogether was a climate package worth about $30 billion. And is largely the buildings piece of this, which is significant, and the vehicles infrastructure, which all told is probably about $10 billion, is all pretty much focused on. Much of it is focused on you know, under-resourced communities.
Yep.
And so there's a common understanding now that we have to start by moving markets that serve the least among us and that serve the people that don't have the capital, you know, that are living hand to mouth, and really do. You know, prove out that and then scale upward from there. And that's a little bit of a different, you know, program model than say the solar or other markets. And so I think you know, it's a challenge, but it's also a humongous opportunity.
So Innes, let's get to the gas conversation. We had to get there.
Who's the tomato?
Well, look, you know, what I would note, and I know your colleague Tennant Reid talks about this regularly, is that many of our energy market forecasts, GSU and the like, they project around 101 petajoules of gas savings, demand reductions, I should say. A bunch of that's electrification, I think about 90 petajoules, and then there's 11 petajoules of efficiency or so forth. Like, what does it mean for business achieving that? And I should say that's by 2030. So this is, you know, we're talking 8 years away, so this is quite a task. And it's just assumed that this is going to turn up. I think some of our panel have suggested that there's a lot of assumptions baked in without necessarily the policy to deliver it. What does it mean for business for those gas savings to turn up or not to turn up over the next 8 years?
Well, let's start with this proposition, is that gas is still, for now, crucial to our economy. There's no way of getting around that. It's crucial in the production of the building blocks of our economy, fertilisers for agriculture, steel, aluminium, bricks, paper, all of the core things that you want in an economy that makes things. Gas is still crucial to that production. Now, those sectors themselves that I just alluded to, and others who are gas reliant, are going through a transformation process. When it comes to energy and energy use and energy efficiency. That will take time. So we talk a lot about green steel, for instance. When I talk to InfraBuild and to BlueScope, they're working, they're pedalling really hard on it, but that's still a decade, maybe 2 decades away from really bearing fruition. So gas is still going to be there. Now, you talked about the 101 petajoules. You know, there's a lot of assumptions built into this, and not all assumptions come true.
Modelling is not entirely to be relied on.
Modelling is not a precise
breaking news, ladies and gentlemen.
I've often found that you get a model out from what you put in, and that's largely it. Look, there's other things going on too. There's there's Narrabri in New South Wales, which may or may not come to fruition. Santos, I think, of 2026, I think they're talking about making a decision on Narrabri. That would be 50 petajoules. There's gas import terminals as well that we're looking at. I spent 3 years trying to get gas import terminals into California and failed dismally with BHP and Woodside. They're probably glad I've failed by now. But
Or in Mexico, yeah.
But you know, that's another component. It makes a difference. Gas is still crucial. It's still important. We can't get away from it. But the point is that industry is working to get away from it.
Yep.
But it will take a long time. There's no flicking switches. There's no overnight solutions to not having it and being reliant on it, both from an industrial perspective but also from a household perspective. It will take a long time for us to walk away from it. And at the moment, there are just some things you just cannot do without gas. But as we work through this process, I think it's important, sort of weaving back into the previous conversation, that we don't penalise industries or businesses that have already taken steps for the steps that they have taken.
Sure.
they're not penalised because they're not acting now. They have started acting in the past, so we have to be very careful about that. We also, to the point also made, the 43% target is going to impact different areas of the economy in different ways. And we can't just throw a blanket over everything and say reduce your emissions by 43% overnight. That's the key point here.
Well, there's an integrated conversation about thinking about the trade-offs and opportunities and challenges in various sectors. And one of our partners, not here today unfortunately, but our friend Andrew Richards from the Energy Users Association of Australia, sort of thinking about the challenges around gas that we're facing over the next period of time. And I don't think he'd mind me saying this. He was actually quite bullish on the idea of electrification in the residential sector, so to free up gas for the industrial sector, because the technology in some elements of the industrial sector is still coming online. So you've got to think about all these in an interconnected way.
Yeah, there's no silver bullets in all of this, as we've discovered in the conversations over the past 15 years in Australia. There's no silver bullets, there's no overnight solutions. We know where we want to get to, and the target is really crucial. But there are many ways to climb that mountain, and we're still sort of crawling our way up and falling sometimes.
Yeah. So look, we're almost out of time. I'm going to give you a little bit of a choose your own adventure, because some of you are advocates and some of you have other positions with governments and government agencies. So you can either, very quickly, 30, 40 seconds, give me your pitch, if you're an advocate, for what you'd like to see in a new energy efficiency, energy performance strategy, or indeed what you're excited about in terms of the energy efficiency conversation that we're going to be ramping up in this nation. I'll start with you, Innes, and then we'll go down the line.
Well, time to think.
The fact that we're having the conversation is exciting. I mean, when I said it was the ugly duckling or the problem child or whatever.
Quite rude to me, yes.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to be rude, but what I was trying to get across was that it has been neglected as a solution, and the fact that and it's always been there as a solution. The point, but it's been neglected in the public consciousness, and I think the point I'd make is a lot of businesses have done a lot and are continuing to do a lot. To Jenny's point, a lot of businesses were slow to the game, but now driven by investor demand, staff demand, customer demand, supply chain demand, this is front and centre of industry thinking at the moment. So businesses like Peter's Siemens, where they do a lot of work in energy efficiency, and others as well, this is going to be an area where, with the 43% target locked in, what we've been talking about today is going to move from the sidelines, perhaps, of the debate to the centre. That's exciting.
It is exciting. Edwina?
Look, I'm going to combine your two pictures, because my pitch and what I'm excited about connect, right? And I've already, I think, spoke about the priority for us is energy efficiency upgrades in low-income homes. And I think we know that that this will require investment from government, but it is something that is good for government to invest in. And this is where I get excited, because if we do approach this, we do apply the equity lens as we approach how we address energy efficiency. We can, we're addressing just, multiple things all at once. So we're addressing energy affordability and energy security, we're addressing poverty and inequality, and we're reducing emissions, and we're addressing climate change. So this opportunity to address, this multitude of challenges within the one kind of policy area is very exciting.
Good on you.
Yeah, I'll start with excitement as well, and I think the fact that we're having the conversation is exciting. That's great. We need to have the conversation, and to what Innes has said, what Senator McAllister said, businesses up for the conversation, and there's a lot of great leadership that's already shown in Australia. So there's a lot of great learnings to learn from, but there's a lot of the property sector, for example, it needs to continue to embrace change here. So. A lot of goodwill, great that we're having the conversation. The pitch, I think the pitch is that if you're thinking about, the real estate sector, and what needs to be done, both existing housing, existing commercial stock, and the new stuff, there isn't a silver bullet. So actually, we're going to need a suite of measures to drive change. Some of those measures can be driven out of the federal government, and others will need the collaboration and support and the drivers of state government, and so there's there's a really important intergovernmental collaboration piece there, which always scares the hells out of anyone who's actually got responsibility to put something like that off. But it is very important. So I think fantastic, lots of great will, lots of energy, but a lot of work to do.
Had your thinking time, Minister?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do a combined offer like Edwina. So my pitch really is for stable, consultative and directional energy policy. The target, 43% by 2030, is a really important foundation for that kind of approach. And it represents a change to where we've been without labouring that point. I think what I'm excited about is that notwithstanding all of the challenges of bringing together a kind of level of coordination on both the supply and demand side of the economy that really we haven't, of the energy system that we haven't seen before, there is an enormous amount of goodwill, business enthusiasm, and in fact strong incentives for businesses to participate across a range of vectors. And so I feel as though we are now in a position where we can work, really draw on the expertise and the enthusiasm of a lot of participants in the system to deliver some really good outcomes for the people that Edwina cares about, but also for the broader community and for the energy system. So I feel very optimistic, and that's the thing I'm excited about.
Wonderful. Andrew, bring us home.
Well, I'm honored to have had the most thinking time. But I think, let's see, we have a real challenge ahead of us for the next, to bridge to 2030. So I think, in the near term, we have to do everything, right? We've got to do this massive build out of clean energy, and then we also have to sort of keep our existing system reliable enough to sort of get along until we really have that bridge. And so I think Australia and California are both in that really basically in that same kind of milieu. I think what we need is a positive long-term vision, right? I mean, the world at point B, where we're headed, is a much better world. It's got clean air, it's got better equity, it's got wonderful indoor spaces, it's got great schools where kids can learn and not breathe crappy air. It's got just a lot of positive characteristics that will flow from the clean energy. It'll have better jobs, more sustainable jobs. We didn't really talk much about the economic development piece of this, but it is absolutely there. There are 250,000 clean energy jobs in California today, and we could quadruple that.
Yep.
And so I think the economy looks different. The air looks different, and it's all better quality 15 years, 20 years hence when we've done all the things that we're talking about doing. And I think that's where often with engineers and, kind of policy wonks like us, we're not media people. We don't know how to sell this stuff. Well, I guess with one exception here. But I think really we need to really embrace this long-term vision that's a positive vision. And I have to respectfully disagree. I think energy efficiency is incredibly sexy.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I'll take it.
But we have to convince the world not necessarily of that, but of this broader set of qualities and characteristics.
There's a lot to do, right? There's a huge amount of effort to get this done and get it done right. And we're not going to get it done and bring the community along with us if the story is we're going to put this huge amount of effort in, and at the end it's everything's going to be about the same as it is now,
Exactly.
right? The houses are going to be the same, your businesses are going to be the same. No, we've got to have that positive vision, as you say. And I think there's the building blocks shared by the panel this afternoon. It's been a great start to the conversation that we're going to be rolling through over the course of this afternoon. Ines, Edwina, Ken, JMac, AMac, thank you so much. Round of applause for our panel. I'm feeling pretty good because I've had 3 keynotes, 3 CEOs, an assistant minister and a commissioner. I'm only running 6 minutes behind at this point in the afternoon, but we will try and make it up. So we're going to take a short 14-minute break. We're going to be back here with my friend Kelly Court to really dive deep on the challenge that we have in the residential sector, but also the opportunity around efficiency and electrification at 2:25. See you soon.